Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this EUA webinar. It's part of a series dedicated to the Bologna process, and we entitled the series Towards Tirana, which is the place where the next Bologna process ministerial meeting will take place later this year at the end of May. So EUA is offering this webinar series in an attempt to bring the Bologna process a bit closer to the higher education sector practitioners and also explain a bit what we are doing there and from the angle of view of different topics that are being featured under the Bologna process. So now you are in the webinar that is dedicated to student-centered learning, the Bologna process perspective. Actually, we should perhaps have called this webinar Student-Centered Learning Seen from the Perspective of Those Who Have to Implement It. And I will explain in a second why. So thank you very much for being here. To start with, I will just share with you some housekeeping rules. First, I need to share my screen just a second. So first of all, this webinar is recorded and all the registrants will have access to the link to the recording. So you will have access to that afterwards. And also the presentations and videos available on the welcome page of this event will be available to you too. So there you will be able to find, for example, recordings and slides of the two previous webinars that we had on mobility and on recognition last month and the month before. So in terms of how this webinar is going to take place, we will have mostly a discussion between several of us with a panel of speakers that we'll introduce in a minute. You have two boxes, two ways of interacting with us. The first one is the chat box, and the chat box is usually used to say hello to everybody, but also if you would like to share some comments on the discussion and share your own experiences, you're most welcome to use the chat box. If you have questions to the speakers, please use the other tab, which is called Q&A. So the Q&A box is a way for us to really see what the questions are and also raise them when it will be time to also open the floor for questions to our speakers. I will now introduce you to our speakers. So in really good company here with four of them. And our first speaker is Coralie de Bruyne. She's a student from the Université Libre de Bruxelles in Belgium. We also have Steve Rutherford. I'm not quite sure if Steve could join us and has already joined or not, but he's coming anyway. So Steve is a National Teaching Fellow and Education Division Lead at the School of Biosciences at Cardiff Universities in the UK. But Steve is also the academic lead of the University Centre for Educational Support and Innovation. After we have Anna Teslatic, who's a Vice Rector for Quality at Algebra University in Croatia, but we also know Anna from another context, actually, as a former co-chair of the Bologna Follow-up Group, Working Group on Learning and Teaching. And Anna, you were particularly active on the topic of student-centered learning, as we will also hear later on. And last but certainly not least, we have Oliver Vettori. Oliver, you're the Director for Academic Affairs at the University Alliance Engage, and you're based in Austria at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. All right, so these are our speakers for today. I will just first kickstart perhaps on the topic with just two short slides for you to put things into context, and then we will go for a discussion with our speakers. All right. So first of all, I kind of dropped the idea of having a background presentation on student-centered learning because, of course, the concept has had a very long life in education science literature, but really to remind here a few points that rose rather from the Bologna process policy context. The first time we find occurrences about student-centered learning was actually already back in 2007 with the London communique of the ministers, where there is a point about an increasing awareness that a significant outcome of the process, of the Bologna process, will be a move towards student-centered higher education and away from teacher-driven provision, and we will continue with the ministers, will continue to support this important development. And at that time, and in the years that followed, in the Bologna process, we very much talked about student-centered learning in terms of how this translates into a learning outcome-based approach, approach, what it means for curricular reforms. It means also that students should be active and responsible citizens, and also, and already at that time, but this has increased in the upcoming years up to today, what it means in terms of having more flexible learning and also more flexible learning path. Several stakeholders like EUA, but also, for example, our colleagues from the European Student Union, from ESU, have also worked on the concept of student-centered learning, trying to map out also what it means for practitioners in higher education. And for example, in EUA's milestone report of 2015, Trends, Learning and Teaching in European Universities, you can find the mention about student-centered learning as with this focus on the learner, and where the learning process is not only, or not primarily even, about transfer of knowledge, but about a deep understanding and critical thinking. And I could probably also add here, and about engaging students. ESU has also worked on this, and they also talked about student-centered learning as both a cultural shift, and a mindset, and also about innovative methods of teaching, aiming to promote learning in communication with teachers. So this the overall idea of teachers being also facilitators in the learning process, and other learners too, and taking students seriously as active participants in their own learning. So to summarize, it's not about one way of teaching that is better because it is student-centered. It's really about a mindset, and probably also about somehow a change and transformation in the learning process itself at higher education institutions. What we can also, what we could also see a bit from our prior work at the EUA on the topic is that there seems to be some consensus or agreement on conditions that are necessary to support student-centered learning at institutions, and more or less cover the following areas: curriculum, design, delivery, assessment, the status of teaching in higher education, institutional strategies, institutional policies, processes, organization, the learning environment and infrastructure that is required and that is available, and also a question of empowerment for students. All right, I will stop sharing for now, hoping that it works. And I think we can start the discussion now, if I could have all the speakers on screen. And I see that Steve is there. Hello, Steve, welcome. Nice to see you. And perhaps we can start with just the first round of questions to all of you. What exactly is student-centered learning nowadays at your institution and in your context? What does it mean? What does it entail? And I will perhaps start here with Oliver in terms of curriculum management and just the overall education offer. What does it mean in terms of innovating teaching, for example, facilitating student learning? How would you organize things to make it happen? And also, how have you come to this, to the situation of today? Has the learning outcomes approach changed anything? And how would you define this anything? I'll let you take the floor.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Therese. These are a lot of questions, and you're expecting a very short answer. First of all, thank you very much for letting me being a part of this. This is exciting, and it's an exciting topic. I think actually we should let Coralie talk most in this round for various reasons. First of all, I've always argued that student-centered learning is a political concept rather than a pedagogical one. And I think you put it on the floor very well with your introduction. But I think there's so many misunderstandings writing it, and there's so many dangers still. If I take a look on even beyond my institution, I still see a lot of drive in the direction. It's anti-lecture, which I think is a shame, because a good lecture is a very, very good learning opportunity. It's very much about how do we need to serve students' needs, but that I think somehow misses the point. And you were very indulgent when introducing me as Director of Academic Affairs for Engage, as I was asking you about that, just because it allows me to make a point, not promoting my alliance, but what we're trying to do on a structural level there is reinterpreting student-centered learning as something that is student-driven. So what we're doing in the Alliance at the moment, we gave the students the key and the budget without supervision across the Alliance and said, do something with it. create within the goals of the alliance, create your own opportunities that are valuable there. That's for some reasons easier in an alliance like this as it is in an individual institution, which are always bound by traditions and cultures and rules. But this is what we try to do there. I think that's a way forward. We need to actually take students seriously and really put them in the driver's seat. And now I'm switching the hat and I'm coming to my main day job as Director of Programs and Teaching and Learning at WU. What we're trying to do there, and we've been trying that for years, you cannot, student-centered means to some degree individualized learning and teaching, catering to different needs there, which means, first of all, you need to know your students. You need to know what they need, because otherwise you're just replacing one didactic paradigm for another one. And it's not always suitable. So it comes all back to the idea of constructive alignment, not going there. But I mean, this idea is still one of the most important in any kind of pedagogical approach. But it comes back to really knowing what those students need. Where are they before starting their journey? And then going there. And some of the things we did worked out well. And some of them, just sharing a fascinating example, we founded a project of a very good senior lecturer at our university, and she was trying out giving students an opportunity to choose their own form of assessment to reach the same learning outcomes. That was a fascinating experiment. It did not work out in every aspect, but these kinds of experiments really showing to what degree can we actually cater to this diversity. For us, this is very much about what student-centered learning means now.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Thank you very much, Oliver. Sorry, I just had a hiccup on my screen, so I got distracted for 1 second. Perhaps I'll ask the same question to Steve, and then I'll go indeed to Coralie, having your view, which is most important here. But I would also like to ask Steve the same question, basically, but also you're the academic lead of a center that provides for educational support and innovation. So perhaps you can also say a few words about what it actually means for individual teachers in the way you try to work with them.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I think so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. Sorry, I had some connection issues. So yeah, again, as Oliver said, thank you very much for the chance to talk to you all. I hope I'm not too echoey in here. I think really for me, the concept of student-centered learning is placing the student, putting the student at the center of the learning activity. So we're focusing on developing the student as an individual, developing them as a learner, developing them as a sort of contributor to society, and focusing on developing their skills, their abilities, their competencies, and their ability to be a self-regulated and independent learner. So whereas I think the paradigm in many universities in the past has been what content can we teach, what can we deliver, what information can we impart, that's the whole idea of a lecturer, standing there lecturing and talking. I think the idea of student-centered learning is focusing more on developing skills, developing understandings, and developing competencies, because information is really easy to obtain now. Yeah, everyone's got one of these, and it's very, very straightforward to get information. What we want to do is develop the student as learners and as independent individuals. So there's a bit of a shift towards encouraging people to focus more on developing the skills of a student, developing their abilities, developing their critical analysis of information, so they can gain information, but then evaluate whether it's effective or not. And so that, for me, is the challenge in persuading colleagues to move more away from content and away from thinking, what do I need to deliver as information, and thinking it more as how do I develop the student as a learner and as a holistic individual who can then develop that learning for themselves and find that information and critique the information. So I think that's where I would say the difference is, and certainly the challenge towards changing the hearts and minds of lecturers.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'm going to Coralie now because I guess your voice is the one that also matters here in this context. Coralie, you were involved at your university in a nice practice of student partnership in a course. For those of you in the audience who attended the European Learning and Teaching Forum just last week in Germany, in Bochum, that was presented in a practice presentation called Students as Teacher Whisperers, I think. So could you perhaps say some more about that, share your experience and also your lessons learned from that? How does student-centered learning sound to you, but also what does it mean to you? And how would you assess the experience for your fellow students in terms of learning gain?
Yeah, so hi, thank you again for having me. I'm really glad I get to speak here. So, well, I joined the co-development team of a physics course, a second-year bachelor physics course, now 6 months ago. So basically, we are working with a multi-skilled team, so with the teacher, teaching assistants, but also a pedagogical advisor and IT specialists, in addition to a few students who join the team every year. So basically, the main aim of this initiative is to include students in the design of the course to try and make the course of physics, which is not an easy one, more student-centered. In our specific case, I'd say student-centered mainly means trying to adapt the course structure so that all students, even if you have students with very different strategies of studying, that everyone finds the materials and the resources that they need in order to succeed in the physics course. So to do this, we take into account not only ideas and opinion inside our team, but we also try to take into account the ideas and opinion of students. So through monthly surveys or even a focus group. So for instance, a few years ago, the physics teacher was asking students to read all the slides before coming to class. So it was like 50 slides of just physics, and well, it wasn't easy. So the first year this co-development was implemented, the students told the teacher, well, no one is doing it. It's too much work, and it just doesn't work. So now they switched it, and now we only have to read like 10 or 20 slides before going to the lecture. So that's just an example of how it works and how this actually helps. So yeah, every year new things are put in place. We try to collect feedback also and create really a process of continuous innovation for the students. And the feedback from students has actually been really positive. For instance, more than 90% of the respondents to the teaching assessments by students have been really positive on the physics course. And every item that is questioned in this survey has improved in the past few years since co-development has been implemented, and the teachers have also been receiving awards. So, and they are awarded by the students. So it's really a great success. And if you talk to the students, they feel like they're listened to, like their ideas are taken into consideration, and well, it just increases the confidence they have, firstly in the team that makes everything and does everything to try and make them succeed, but also in themselves, because they feel like there is so much available to them that they can do it, they can succeed in this course. So yeah, I think for me it's an extremely enriching experience. I work with a really, really diverse team towards like really a project where I feel this has an impact, and yeah, and to see that it has success and that students really appreciate it, it's really great, and I'm so glad I get to do this.
Thank you very much, Coralie. Well, this is a really, really interesting experience, and I guess we'll get back to that also later. And I might have also some questions for all of you about this type of practice later. But perhaps let's first go to Anna. Anna, also to have your view on what exactly it means, but in your institutional context. But you were also a co-chair of the Bologna group on learning and teaching, as I mentioned at the beginning, and you led the group work specifically on the student-centered learning. And we briefly touched upon that when introducing the topic, but student-centered learning can actually be a very diversely interpreted concept as well. Could you share your view on how this is being picked up, or how it is being also even understood nowadays in the European higher education area context?
Thank you, Therese. Thank you for your question, and thank you, of course, for inviting me to contribute to this discussion. And I'm always happy to discuss this topic because this is one of my favorite in the Bologna process.
Okay.
And as you mentioned in the group on learning and teaching, with quite diverse members coming from institutions or quality assurance agencies or national authorities, we did start the discussion with trying to understand the concept, trying even to define the topic. And that was one of the intentions. How can we agree on a definition that would be shared by everybody? And that was one difficulty, because the concept, as the previous speakers already mentioned and emphasized, different facets and different dimensions. So it depends whether we are going to look at it from the political point of view, as Oliver said, or a pedagogical point of view, or even policies on equity and diversity have a significant place in these discussions. So if I would summarize our discussion about the definition of the concept, which we, by the way, didn't manage to reach consensus on, but we anyhow spent a couple of sessions trying to capture the concept in its various dimensions, I would maybe structure it around these three maybe broader dimensions, which is the pedagogical aspect that focuses on learning and teaching and assessment as well approaches. So how this change of roles between teachers and students affect the teaching and learning process, and what support structures institutions are offering both to teachers and students, because we emphasize a couple of times that no students and no teachers are very eager sometimes to embrace this power that they get. Students sometimes feel afraid to make choices, because with the choice there is a responsibility that comes as well. And teachers, they are maybe just practicing their old practices, and it is difficult to change. It is difficult to introduce some new approaches with, especially without a proper training or exchange of experience and views between the teachers. So this pedagogical aspect, I think it is a very important one, because it also introduces different teaching practices. So no more lectures where students are listening and teachers are speaking, but we need to define and to develop different approaches, such as project-based learning, problem-based learning, work-based learning, challenge-based learning, or teamwork, including multicultural, multinational teams of students. So all these very nice ways of providing with different approaches in learning and teaching. So this would be the pedagogical one. And the equity on policies, and also the governance, which we maybe didn't mention at the beginning. The role of students in decision-making processes in the institution is also an important element of student-centered learning.
Thank you very much, Anna. I think we have a first question that flew in. Should we take it? Yes, we could take it, I think. And then afterwards, I also have a question that might be a bit related. So we have a question from Lucien Bollard. Hello, Lucien. Nice to have you here. To all speakers, so this is a question to all of you. The most difficult challenge seems to me to try to develop this with groups of more than 30 students. So this is something we've heard already several times, but I think it always comes back, and it's good that we discuss it now. How do you actually manage it with big cohorts of students, big groups? Preparing the students with material and questions before the lecture seems crucial. Can you give us some practical tricks? Who would like to take that up to start with? Yes, Steve, please go ahead.
I can, if you like.
Yeah.
So I teach classes of 400 or 500, and it's very difficult to do that in a very sort of one-to-one way, obviously. So they have to be lectures typically, but there are ways of including students and getting students actively working within the lecture. So one key thing that I use, for example, which I learned from using Zoom during the pandemic, is the chat function on Zoom enabled the students to interact throughout the lecture, and no student is going to stick their hand up in front of 500 other students within a live lecture. So what I use is a platform like Mentimeter. There are other platforms that allow the students to post questions, and then I stop every now and then and answer those questions. So I have a QR code at the top of all of my slides, and the students can post a question, and they're brilliant questions. They're not, can you go over this again? They're really insightful, thoughtful, really and some of them I don't have answers to. But then also getting them to, you pose an open question to them, and again, you can use a platform like Mentimeter or some sort of online contributing platform that enables them to show their ideas, and that gets them actively involved in the session. So they're contributing, they're not just sitting there passively listening. And that's a key approach to take. So find some means, and using electronic means of getting the students to actively contribute during the actual session itself. It breaks up the teaching, which means it resets their attention clock, but also it makes them part of the session. And you can do that with classes of 400 or 500 students or more.
Thank you very much, Steve. I think this also relates a bit to what Anna just mentioned, right? About student, how do you boost, how do you encourage, and how do you enable student agency? How to make them feel empowered to become more active, to become more comfortable on this. Coralie, perhaps you would like to comment on this?
Yeah, well, it was a bit the same, because in the physics course we are also around 300. But this is also used by the teachers, so we can basically ask questions online, because, well, no one wants to ask a question in front of so many people, so we can interact online, and then the teacher stops, I think, like every 15 or 20 minutes to just check if anyone has a question. And then, like I said, we're provided with slides before the lectures. Some slides we need to read, and then we've got a small test that we need to make before going to lecture, so to see if we got it or not. And so I think that also makes students involved. So yeah.
Thank you. I don't know if Anna or Oliver or Oliver would like to briefly comment on this question as well.
Yes, maybe shortly. I think that bringing students in teams can be also an efficient way of doing that in class as well. So they can work in small groups, having a joint project, a small scale project, just that can be delivered with that can be completed within a class, and then make them present and discuss openly. So let them run the show, not necessarily that the professor is the one that's just lecturing and speaking. And of course, it is very, nowadays, I think it's even impossible from students to expect that they would keep the attention of listening all the time. So even with a bigger number of 300, it's really amazing. I don't know how you manage that, but even, well, smaller but big enough number of students, we could make some active parts of the lecture, I think.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Anna. Oliver, would you like to say a word on this one too?
I was actually just thinking about Lucia's question. Lucia, hi, good not to see you, but to read from you at least. I think it comes back to my initial point. We seem to have these implicit normative templates of what student-centered learning is about. And you were saying it yourself, it's an umbrella concept. So I think that the question as such is a great one, but it's also flawed in a way that we seem to assume there is a specific right kind of student-centered learning. And I think coming back to what my three colleagues here just said, if I just try to break it down, then I would say in essence, it has a lot to do with relationship building and respect for the students in your classroom. Now you can do it as I do with my 35 students, trying to memorize their names after the first 20 minutes of class. They loved it because they feel taken seriously. I have colleagues like Steve who do that for 400, 500, 600. Of course, they can't memorize every single name. So what do? They prepare and they try to identify at least a dozen of them ahead. Now that seems like a trick, but students realize the person is caring about it. It comes down as a second dimension to learning effectiveness. Do all students have the opportunity to learn what they're supposed to learn with regard to learning outcomes? That's a matter of the didactic concept. That has nothing to do with size and circumstances. That's a question. And we invest still too little into the didactic design of courses and always talking about didactic skills of the teachers. But in essence, it's the didactic design, including assessment, because I saw there's a question of your role. And third part, coming to what Anna also said, and for me, the third dimension is accessibility. Do all students have the same access to that? And that has a lot to do with learning infrastructure. Yeah, and learning environments. And there is fantastic student-centered classes I've seen that are purely done online because the way they're designed didactically, the way there's interaction between the people doing that, even if it's a machine, showing people some kind of personal response and the accessibility of the system all work in favor of the learners.
Thank you very much, Oliver. I think this really nicely complements what we have heard till now. I will perhaps just continue with a question to Coralie, which kind of follows a bit the same line of what you have just said. Okay, there is a button display, so I'm going to display it so that you see it in big on your screen. Coralie, why do you think the project you were involved in was successful in integrating student-centered learning? What was done differently than in other teaching and learning scenarios, especially from a student perspective? I feel being a bit provocative today, and perhaps I can even add a sub-question. How many courses at ULB are actually taught in such a student-centered perspective? Although we have heard already from Oliver and others that there might be different routes to the same destination. How would you, would you define the success factors here?
Well, I think to respond, well, maybe first to the last question, there are not many courses like that. I feel like this is the only one where we can really speak our mind. So even before I joined the co-development team, so last year, basically, I needed to pass the course. So I was really a student of the course, and then I joined the team this year. But so I can see how different it is from other courses. So I feel like it's the only one where students are so involved, because even if you're not in the team, well, like I said earlier, you've got the monthly service, so you speak your mind, and you've also got a focus group. So basically we take 8 students from the 300, and these students, well, every student can ask to be in the focus group, and then, well, we select them because we try to have a diversity within the group. But it means that well, you can join the focus group if you like. So I feel like it's really the only course where I felt like I could really speak my mind freely, because the other ones, the only feedback you can give is at the end of the year, and well, it's for me it's not enough. And so physics, you give it every month. And well, I personally, as a student, before I joined the team, I felt like what I was saying, well, I saw changes throughout the year, so it was really amazing. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I have a lot of questions actually floating in right now, but perhaps I will also keep some for later, if you're all right with that. But we also would like perhaps to hear from our audience about that. Can we launch the first poll? Not looking, but seeing if my colleagues from the back end can hear me. Can we perhaps launch the first poll that we have here? And normally it should be displayed on your screen. So that's for everybody, not only for our speakers. Please do try to answer if you want to and if you can. To you, what characterizes student-centered learning? There's no wrong answer, so you can choose multiple options if you want to. Teachers are facilitators for learning, active learning methodologies, interdisciplinarity, learners as individuals with own needs, learning styles, etc. and flexibility in learning, formative assessment, continuous feedback, student participation in governance. I see that our audience is already getting active. I don't know if there is a ranking of this. Yeah, so right now, and it's still counting, so please vote. Right now, I see that formative assessment, continuous feedback are collecting a lot of answers, but also student participation in education governance. And, flexibility in learning is increasing by much. Active learning methodologies too. Teachers as facilitators, that follows. All right, that's interesting, because the most the most publicity answers seem to be active learning methodologies and flexibility in learning, so study pace, mix of modes, etc. Interestingly, also interdisciplinarity gets a bit less of votes. I would like to look at my speakers now, and would anybody like to comment on this? Because active learning is, I mean, we tend to define a lot student learning by active learning, sometimes even interchangeably in terms, and we also tend to talk a lot about flexible learning. And Oliver, you rightly mentioned in your first intervention also that this is this also implies knowing your students, but then there is a whole question of how you manage big cohorts, etc. Does anybody want to comment on the results of the poll right now? Just do so if you want. Yes.
Yeah, if I may start, maybe I would choose flexibility. It's a very important concept, I would say, and it broadens the topic of student-centered learning, because flexibility you can really apply in different areas, not only in teaching and learning, but for example, in cross-border cooperation, mobility, and recognition. And I just remember that because my institution has been preparing together in a consortium an application for European University Alliance. And there we open discussions on flexible learning pathways, cross-border and transnational mobility of teachers and learners and students as well. So, and I realized, because only for 3 years I've been working for an institution, before I was more into policy making, but now I realize how many difficulties there is on the ground in relation to the lack of flexibility when it comes to recognition of study periods abroad, establishing learning agreements in a more flexible way, allowing students to choose topics and courses that are not necessarily within the domain that they are studying, but that are quite important for their personal growth and professional growth as well. So I think that flexibility is something that all of us at different levels should be working much more, because it can bring so many new dimensions and richness in our learning, instead of putting ourselves in boxes and asking our students to do the same.
Thank you very much, Anna. Somebody else would like to comment? Otherwise, I'll go into the next questions that we have. I'm trying to look at my speakers in the eyes. Oh, Steve, yes?
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that. And yeah, it's interesting, as you say, that flexibility and active learning seem to be the ones that are most popular. Yeah, I think active learning, absolutely. We need to focus. Student-centered learning is about the student being involved, the student being an active partner in the learning process, and not being just a passive recipient of information. So anything we can do that gets the student actively involved, gets them talking, gets them discussing, gets them challenging ideas, gets them finding information out for themselves, which is a much more powerful way of learning than being taught. And so the very first of the possibilities, teachers being facilitators for learning, I think that's a key element with that. We need to change the way in which we think of ourselves, especially in higher education, as we're here to guide and support and develop the students. We're not here to impart information, because information is very, very easy to access now. We need to be there more as people who are developing the students and supporting them, rather than the sage on the stage delivering content.
Thank you very much, Steve. I still have a few questions here in the Q&A box. That's great. Thank you to all participants to the webinar, because those are really interesting ones. I'll keep them for now, because perhaps we'll move to the next stage of the discussion, and I'll pick those questions up later. There is an important block, for example, on assessment, that I think we will need to address with our panel too. But perhaps first, the first question to introduce to this is, how would you, how do you know actually that student-centered learning works in your context? How do you assess how it is working at curriculum level, or generally in learning and teaching? What have been, or what are the main difficulties here, and what exactly could be improved? I'm keeping the assessment questions for that part, because I know that's the part that has been challenging so far at many places too. But I would like to first perhaps do a tour de table and start with Coralie, and what you would like to let us know based on your experience. What were your main difficulties being involved in these partnership initiatives, but also for you generally as students, if you have to engage in a student-centered curriculum, what would be your recommendations or points to improve?
Well, I'd say really from my personal experience, if you're going to include students in a team, well, you got to think about the fact that, well, we're just students, so we're less experienced, and we're not always really confident to speak up and well, just generate ideas. So I think what was really important at the beginning of the year, in my experience, was how the whole team just made us feel confident, and, well, in a certain way made us feel actually interesting. Like they were asking questions about our personal experience. And so if you have to engage in something like that, it's really important that the whole team makes you feel like your ideas and opinion really matters. And so it was a bit hard to speak up in the beginning, but I think the team managed that very well. And then the fact that we have such a diverse team also, because sometimes your students, you have many ideas, but some things are just not feasible. And so that's where the perks of having such a diverse team kick in. For example, I think many students don't attend the lecture because it's so early in the morning. It's at 8 o'clock, and so I proposed, like, okay, let's switch the schedule, but it's actually at the university level to find a classroom for 300 people. It's so hard. So I think that's where the fact that you have such a diverse team, it's really important.
Thank you very much, Coralie. I will turn to perhaps to Steve and Oliver first, and ask the same question. What has proved also challenge, or simply how do you know that it works, and what still could be improved? But also there is a question of how we can address student partnership more generally, how feasible it is to mainstream a bit across the institution. I think we have a question in the question box. Where is it now? Yes, that says also, what are your experiences with building trust and partnership between teachers and students? How do we build this empowerment journey that a student may would one day, well, may be engaging into one day? One of you would like to take a floor? Oh,
do you want to go, Oliver, or shall I?
As you wish.
Okay. Yeah. So I think certainly the challenge. There are two challenges. One is getting the academic staff involved and engaged with this as a concept, and also getting the students thinking about it as well. One of the major challenges is the perception when students come to university that you get lectured at university and it's a very passive process. And that's something we need to overcome as a cultural thing, but also we need to make sure that staff and academics are doing that as well, because one of the problems we have, we say to students, you come to university, we want you to think, we want you to critique, we want you to analyze, we want you to challenge ideas. Now sit down, shut up, and I'm going to talk at you for 50 minutes. So, we need to change the narrative and how we present ourselves and the hidden curriculum around that of, getting people to, actually do what we say we want our students to do. So the challenge of assessing whether that's working or not is, I think, finding out whether the students are actively engaged in the learning process, and to what extent do they feel that they're part of the institution. The big challenge we've got at Cardiff, which we've been trying to do, is thinking about the broader learning community. So rather than there being students and academics, a student is just a more junior version of an academic. They're just someone who's earlier on the path than someone like myself is. So they're part of the same community. They should be part of the same, family, if you like, of individuals at the university. So that, I think, is the major challenge, is making sure that students feel part of a broader learning community. I'll pass over to Oliver.
Thank you very much, Steve. Oliver, yeah?
Thank you. I feel like repeating myself a lot today, but I'll try another angle. This whole question about where are we with student-centered learning, I think, is again pointing in the wrong direction. There is no water level indicator for a concept that keeps changing, and it's not doing justice to any of the dynamics involved in here. Yeah, you have a fluctuation of teachers. You have students 10 years ago needed very different things, came with a very different mindset. I saw a couple of questions also circling around AI. Not going there in detail, but this is now something where students, again, come with a different attitude, a different equipment, different tools that they've tried out, different working skills. So there is no absolute statement where we could say, oh, now we have improved by 20% when it comes to student-centered learning. I think part of the challenge there is that the whole institution needs to be permanently reflective. So if I would be using a proxy, the number of course designs or programs that have been left unchanged for more than 5 years, well, that might not be a good indicator. Yeah, if that number is too high, that's not a good sign. But this is just a proxy. So where do you see the challenge operatively? We invest a lot of time and effort into trying to speak to as many teachers as possible and learners as possible, going into details on the programs, going into details on the courses. But it's a big institution, 22,000 students, 25 degree programs, about 4,000 classes every year. So we also have to find smart ways around it, because some of the teachers might have left the university already before we even get to talk to them. So the big challenge is we can only improve that through dialogue and communication. And to how many people can you talk in a given time? So how do you find the right multipliers, the right people to actually help you carry it forward, that will also kind of impart their own experience on the next generation of teachers in the right way? This, for us, is the key challenge at the moment.
Thank you very much, Oliver. I'll pass the floor to Anna, and also to Anna to share a view about how feasible do you actually think it is to mainstream, but at least to spread the word at EHEA level. We are not here talking, I think it's quite clear now, at least I hope it's quite clear now for our audience, we're not here talking about one way to do it and to have one path, let's say, of progress. But really, how do you think it could be taken up, let's say, at the EHEA level?
Yeah, I think there are excellent examples of very creative teachers and progressive institutions that can and would like to share between others the practices that they are experimenting. And what I think could be done at the level of EHEA is actually to facilitate the exchange of this experience. In the working group on learning and teaching, where I actually represented EURASHE, which is an association of professionally oriented higher education institutions, we have those communities of practice where we come and join forces in exploring different ways of doing things under different topics. So why not to have a group at the Bologna level on student-centered learning, or to push forward the implementation of the concepts, because in the previous working group we were there to develop indicators, to establish some new ideas for further commitments and developments of the concept. But I think now it's time to focus on the implementation, and as it was with the Bologna key commitments, the 3 commitments that we are all familiar with, when for years we were discussing the developments, but then we established structures of peer learning groups that were working on exchanging experience and working on the implementation. And I think at the EHEA level now, where we are is actually at the moment where we would like to push forward the implementation of the concept and then exchange the experience on how different institutions are practicing it.
All right. Thank you very much, Anna. Time is moving, and so we'll try to make a smart use of the few minutes that we have left here. I actually would like to tackle with you the overall aspects of assessment because, well, Steve, I see that you have already answered in written, but perhaps you would like to elaborate on that, and Oliver too, because indeed, student-centered learning can only work if the assessment is also in line with this, and it is clear that it should be concentrated on insight and application rather than knowledge. And the overall question is, how do you do that? Oliver also mentioned that you had you had an experience of giving the students the option to choose their own form of assessment to show if they have reached the desired learning outcomes. Could you please elaborate also on that? This is another question in the chat box. So a few words on assessment and perhaps why it is remaining so sometimes a bit difficult to address that with the same philosophy, I would say, than in designing and delivering curriculum. Who would like to start with this? Oliver, maybe?
I can try to. It's a broad question.
It's a very broad question.
I do believe, I always find it interesting because it seems to be separated conceptually. But it is an integrated part of teaching. I mean, there is no teaching without any kind of feedback or assessment. And there is that's why I think I do agree. Also, when it comes to didactic trainings, we teach people how to present in front of a classroom, all those things. But this is not what is facilitating learning as much as it is to actually provide feedback. You just have to take a look at learning theories, or to give students a way to apply their knowledge, or to give them a way to actually exchange views. And also, so this is integrated in pedagogy, and I always find it interesting how we are somehow forgetting that. Now, having said it, coming back to the example, because there was an interest in that, as I said, it did not work out as much as we hoped it would do, but as I said, it was an experiment. But also because we felt that in this case, also the learners were not yet ready for that. Because what we have, and we have overriding that every aspect in education always, we have economic thinking, we have people who are aware of the time. Learning is something very, very exhausting. It takes time. And sometimes we learn very wrong things. Yeah, I mean, not always we learn what the formal learning outcomes is. There is also the whole notion of hidden curricula. So people constantly learn, but not necessarily things they need to learn, because that's taking time and effort and whatever that means. Not everything is fun in there. So not everyone there was ready yet to find a solution that was not just fitting their needs economically, but what would really pushing them forward with regard to learning. And now coming back to the poll, because what I found curious was also...
Okay, sorry.
What I found curious was also this whole emphasis on formative assessment. I'm a big fan of that. But what I see in my institutions, in all other institutions I've visited so far, a lot of teachers are forgetting that it also comes back to individual feedback on every part of formative assessment. Just having 3 exams across the semester is not formative if you don't give students an opportunity to learn based on previous results. Just giving them multiple group works, but no feedback at all, is not formative assessment. So learning needs to be really supported. Sorry, that was very long, but it was a very broad question. I hope that leaves enough time for Steve and my colleagues to chime in.
Yes, of course. Perhaps Coralie and also Steve would like to say a few words on assessment, how to assess students in a way that makes sense.
You can go first. I'll think about it.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, Steve.
Very briefly, I'd say four key things. Well, the key thing is we need to think about assessment is learning. So assessment is part of the learning process. It's not just an auditing of what students know. So I would say 4 key things. Firstly, focusing on meaningful assessment. So that's assessment that's authentic, it's assessment that develops skills and develops competencies with the students and are aligned to what they will do after they graduate. Second one, as Oliver was saying, is an element of student choice. So in terms of the choice of the medium of the assessment, and making sure that the assessment is meaningful and inclusive to them. Feedback, the third one is feedback that focuses on developing the skills, so feeding forwards rather than commenting over much on what the student has done. It's what they need to do next. And the last one is thinking about backwards design. So when we design our courses, we start off with what's the skill we want to get, what's the feedback we need to provide students, in what form to develop that skill, what assessment can provide us with the opportunity to create that feedback, and then what's the content we need to teach to frame all of that. So think about the content last and the skill first.
Thank you very much, Steve. I think that was very clear. Kohali, you would like to add something?
I'm not sure I can add anything really to this question. I feel like it was very complete, but maybe someone has a more specific question, maybe. But...
Okay, thank you very much. Steve, you're moving. All right. I think we are also approaching the end, more or less, of our webinar. We still have a few minutes left. So perhaps a very, very quick tour de table for all of you. And I'll start with Anna this time. Wish lists for policymakers, because after all, this webinar is part of a series that is about the Bologna process, an intergovernmental process where ministers also sit. What would you recommend that your national policymakers could do? What could be done at EHEA level? And perhaps to be a bit provocative there too, do you actually think that there is something to be done by policymakers in that context? Isn't that more a matter of educators and education institutions and students rather than politics? Perhaps you would like to start on this, Anna, briefly?
Yes, of course, many things can be done by the policymakers. And I think one of the achievements that we did in the working group on learning and teaching is that we managed to open up a chapter on learning and teaching in the Bologna implementation report, which is the main evidence-based book, I would say, for all those working on different topics in the Bologna process. So for the first time now, in a couple of months, we will have some evidence of what is happening in different countries from the national or system level policies. So to what extent the institutions are supported financially, in terms of strategies and policies that are put in place, in terms of different supportive measures and structures and systems, or even national bodies that are competent to support learning and teaching in general, but student-centered learning included. So I think what in future we could do, we could really use the results, we could use the information from the Bologna implementation report and develop further projects that would support the implementation, that would support institutions in achieving the objectives, which is making student-centered learning a reality. I think one of the objectives that we would all like to see in learning and teaching strategies.
Thank you very much, Anna. I've just put a link also in the chat box to the latest versions, at least, of the Bologna Process implementation report, which is indeed a very important state of play mapping study about what is happening in Europe. I'll quickly go to perhaps Oliver first. Wish lists, or should we just get our heads about the fact that it's not really for policymaking? What would you what would you say?
But it very much is. I can brief on that. If we understand policies as programs guiding behavior, it's not politics, it's policy, then of course we need policies. Yeah, because other than through policies, organizations are very difficult to actually go in a certain direction. But what we need is good policies. I've seen so many assessment policies and teaching and learning policies that have that in the name only because they are declarations of intent. They have a couple of buzzwords in there, but they're not working as programs driving people in a certain direction, including the measures to go there. So what we need is, yes, we need policies, but we need good ones.
Thank you very much. I'll go to Coralie. Coralie, some wish lists for policymakers. What could work better, perhaps?
Yeah, so it's kind of specific, but one thing we were talking about within our team is whether this whole co-development experience could maybe be an alternative to an internship, because you might not be working in the specific area of your studies. Like physics is not what I'm studying, but you're still developing skills that are so important for your life after studies. So it could also allow students to take part in such initiatives way more easily, because it takes a lot of time, and so if it's included in the studies, maybe it could get a broader effect. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Coralie, and I'll let the last word to Steve for this whole webinar, because we actually already exceeded a bit time, but that's fine. Steve, wish lists?
So I'd say 4 things on my wish list. Firstly, focusing on student partnership, so encouraging institutions to actively engage students as co-designers, co-developers, co-reviewers of the teaching and assessment processes. I think focusing on aligning very clearly with graduate outcomes, so what a student needs to show once they graduate, rather than what we can teach them and what we think we want to assess. Focusing on meaningful assessment, so it's assessment activities that are aligned to things that students will actually do once they graduate, rather than an over-reliance on essays and quizzes and things. And then being a bit more transparent about what we think we so having our transcripts focusing on competencies and skills and the things a student can do, rather than they got 79% for this particular subject, which means nothing to an employer. So those 4 key things.
All right. Thank you very much, Steve. I think this is basically time to wrap up this webinar. And I'm really sorry to all people who have put questions here, but sometimes very interesting ones, but I could not manage to ask all of them. We have material to feed another hour of exchange, I think, there. There is somebody who wanted to invite you, Anna, to a conference. Well, to this person who's anonymous in my list, at least, drop an email to the email address that you got when receiving the link, and we will forward to Anna, and then we will see. So the conference is called The Role of Student-Centered Learning and Enhancing University Quality. It's a whole program. All right, thank you very much. I just would like to share a last slide, if I can. Just a second, to announce our next webinar in the pipeline. Well, the next webinar that we have of the same series about the Bologna process is taking place on the 5th of March, same time, and it's about quality assurance. What is next for the European Quality Assurance Framework? You can register in the same platform, and there are more to come on fundamental values, social inclusion, and also monitoring data for the Bologna process, etc., etc. So thank you very much. I'll stop sharing to see my speakers for a last time. Thank you very much to all of you who have attended. Thank you for your time. I would like to give a good applause and a big thank you to all my speakers here, Coralie, Anna, Steve, and Oliver. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. And I wish you all an excellent afternoon and see you soon, I hope. Thank you very much.